There's an insane reason why the United States never switched over to the metric system. In 1793, Thomas Jefferson wrote to his friends in France requesting help with adopting a new system of measurement. The French responded by sending a scientist named Joseph Dombey to deliver the standards of measurement for the metric system. However, the ship Dombey was traveling on was eventually knocked off course by a storm and ended up deep in pirate territory. The scientist was soon kidnapped by pirates and imprisoned on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Unfortunately, Dombey died before they were able to ransom him, so the units of measurement never made it to Jefferson. And that's why America went with yards. When Jimi Hendrix was 16, his mother died from a ruptured spleen at the young age of 33. But Jimi's father didn't allow him or his brother to attend the funeral. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey and told them that this was how men should deal with a loss. After several hours of drinking on board a ferry, Englishwoman Emma Blackwell fell to her death. She'd apparently been imitating Kate Winslet's pose from the Titanic movie and lost her footing before plummeting from the ship. Smile mask syndrome is a psychological condition characterized by prolonged unnatural smiling. It can lead to painful strain of the facial muscles and result in an inability to stop smiling even when agitated or upset. In 1993, Missouri man James Scott damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres, and the 23-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison for intentionally causing a catastrophe. Built during the reign of King Louis XVI in 1774, the Writing Boy was the first automatic android ever created. It was hand-built by Swiss watchmaker Pierre-Jacques Dreux, and was designed to mimic the act of someone writing with incredible precision. A milestone in the history of robotics and engineering, the android is comprised of 6,000 moving parts that took more than 20 months to put together. The Sidereum of St. Veronica is an engraving made by French artist Claude Milan in 1649. It was created from a single spiraling unbroken line that starts at the tip of Jesus' nose. Discovered in 1972, this 8-inch long deuce was dropped by a Viking around the 8th century. Weighing in at just under 5 corics, it's the largest fossilized human turd ever found, and has provided valuable insights into the dietary practices of ancient Vikings. In 2013, an ancient tree at an archaeological site in Romania was uprooted during a thunderstorm. Beneath the tree, the site's caretaker discovered an ancient bronze matrix that was used as a mold to craft jewelry for the Dacian civilization over 2,000 years ago. Just last year, Irish farmer Michael Boyle found this 50-pound chunk of bog butter on his property after digging up something that reeked of cheese. Ancient farmers would often bury these large chunks of animal fat in bogs for preservation. Despite it dating all the way back to the Bronze Age, Boyle says it still tastes like butter. In the year 2000, 11-year-old Candace Newmaker died during an extreme therapy session in Colorado. The adopted girl was undergoing attachment therapy when 4 unlicensed therapists decided to perform the controversial treatment known as rebirthing. She was wrapped in a flannel sheet and covered with pillows to represent a womb and was told to fight her way out of it, with the apparent expectation that this would help her attach to her adoptive mother. All 4 therapists used their body weight to push down on Candace and resist her attempts to free herself. Candace screamed several times that she couldn't breathe and was gonna die, and even started to vomit, but was simply called a quitter by one of the therapists. 40 minutes into the session, Candace was asked if she was ready to be reborn, to which she faintly responded no, which would be her last word before she died of asphyxiation. All 4 fake therapists were prosecuted, 2 of whom were sentenced to 16 years in prison after the disturbing footage was shown in court. 18-year-old student John Savage was spared during the Columbine massacre in 1999. He was hiding underneath a table in the library as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were going around shooting random students. At one point, Harris aimed his gun at Savage and told him to identify himself. A friend of Klebold's, John showed his face and asked Klebold what he was doing. The shooter responded, "Oh, just killing people." Savage then asked if they were gonna kill him, to which Klebold responded no and told John to run out of the building, which he did. Cello player Mike Edwards was an original founding member of the band Electric Light Orchestra. Tragically, he died in 2010 when a massive hay bale rolled down a hillside and collided with his van. In 2008, a man from California injected cocaine into his arm and apparently thought he accidentally injected some air into his vein. so he quickly ran into a Denny's restaurant and attempted to amputate his own arm using a butter knife. Police eventually subdued the man with a taser and rushed him to the hospital as Denny's closed for the night. This 1968 photo shows South Vietnamese women and children just moments before they were killed in the My Lai massacre. Witnesses later stated that American troops tried tearing the blouse off the woman in back as her mother attempted to protect her. Grape had become such a big issue across Africa that a South African medical technician invented Grape-X in 2005. It's a device with sharp teeth that gets inserted into a woman's private area. Any man who attempts to grape her will impale himself on the teeth and must go to the hospital to have the device removed. In Guatemala 2017, hundreds of teenage girls tried to protest and escape from an orphanage due to continuous grape and abuse. As punishment, 51 of them were locked in a small classroom without any food, water, or toilets. The next day, a fire was started inside the room, reportedly by several girls as an act of protest. But the staff still refused to open the door and simply watched them all burn from the outside. 41 girls ended up perishing in this awful tragedy. The Babushka Lady was the name given to an unidentified person who was present at JFK's assassination in 1963. He or she was seen filming before and after the president was shot in the head, but later disappeared into the crowd. That recording may have been crucial in revealing the truth about JFK's killing, but the person has never come forward with the footage. Austrian Mayor Hans Steininger died in 1567 after breaking his neck by tripping on his own ridiculously long beard while running from a house fire. In 2010, a Russian man died after being voluntarily buried alive by his friends. He was simply trying to overcome his irrational fear of dying when the ground suddenly caved in and crushed him. In 2008, a British woman died in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Her husband admitted he would hook homemade clamps to the woman's nipples and administer electric shocks to turn her on. Apparently, it went a little too far this one time, and the woman was electrocuted to death. The husband was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to at least 20 years in prison. Morbid Facts, Part 523. In 1899, brothers George and Willie Muse were kidnapped from their farm in Virginia by a freak hunter when they were just little boys. Born with albinism, they were forced to perform in circuses for the next 25 years under the names the Sheep-Headed Cannibals and Ambassadors from Mars. They were often ordered to partake in disturbing acts such as biting the heads off of snakes or consuming raw meat in front of crowds. The brothers essentially worked as modern-day slaves until their mother found them working for the Ringling Brothers and successfully sued for their release. In 2002, German actor Gunther Kaufmann confessed to falling on his accountant during a fight and accidentally suffocating the man to death with his 260-pound body. The actor was subsequently sentenced to 15 years in prison as a result of the incident. But 3 years later, it was revealed that Kaufman was innocent and had only confessed to protect his dying wife, who had actually murdered the accountant. After a night of drinking in 2010, Michigan man Jeffrey Duthette was sleeping in his bed when his dog Kiko suddenly bit off his toe. When he went to the hospital, it turned out the toe had a bad infection that likely would have spread and killed Jerry if left untreated. Thus, the dog had saved his owner's life. Talented artist Norman Lee worked for Marvel Comics for nearly 20 years until he suddenly disappeared in 2015. He was snorkeling in the Cayman Islands with his wife but never returned ashore, and his body was never found. In 1996, 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died as a result of his obsession to smell good. The teenager covered his entire body in cologne at least twice per day until he eventually died from a heart attack. At the time of his death, Capewell had 10 times the lethal dosage of butane in his blood after the gas built up in his body for several months. In 1974, a group of 6 men entered the Hi-Fi audio store in Utah and held everyone inside hostage. The hostages were then subjected to brutal torture, including being forced to drink drain cleaner, which left them with horrible burns in their throats and mouths. One of the victims had a ballpoint pen inserted into his ear that was stomped on until it punctured his eardrum and came out his throat. All 5 hostages were later shot in the head, 3 of whom died. 2 of the perpetrators were sentenced to death, while the 3 other men involved were never caught. Morbid Facts, Part 519. In 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips was kidnapped while he was asleep in his Wisconsin bedroom. He'd been abducted by 17-year-old Joseph Clark, a local boy who was obsessed with the sound of bones breaking. Over 48 grueling hours, Clark broke both of the boys' hips, legs, shins, and ankles with his bare hands. Phillips eventually managed to escape from the nightmare and reported Clark to police. Sometime later, Phillips was sitting at home awaiting the trial when one of Clark's friends rang the doorbell and shot Phillips twice in the back, apparently to prevent him from testifying. Clark was sentenced to life in prison, and Phillips was eventually able to walk again. In 2008, Indigenous Canadian man Brian Sinclair went to the hospital because of a blocked catheter. After many hours passed in the waiting area, other patients began to urge medical staff to attend to Sinclair, who was clearly in pain, but they responded that they were helping other patients and would eventually get to him. After 34 hours had passed, Sinclair ended up dying in the waiting room and had already developed rigor mortis by the time medical staff attended to him. Turns out he had a very treatable bladder infection and could have easily been saved. In 1997, the Cat in the Hat Thanksgiving Day Parade float careened out of control due to high winds, knocking a lamppost into the head of Kathleen Karana, putting her in a month-long coma. She sued Macy's and the city for $395 million and ended up settling for an undisclosed amount in 2001. Kathleen eventually purchased a nice New York City apartment with the settlement money, but just 5 years later, Yankees pitcher Corey Lidle crashed his plane into her building and the engine ended up in her bedroom. Luckily, the crash happened just minutes before Kathleen was due to arrive home, but Lidle and his flight instructor were both killed while 21 others in the building were injured. Adding to the weirdness of this story, the flight instructor's friend was also supposed to be on this flight but got stuck in traffic and told them to leave without him. So he managed to escape death until just 1 month later when he was killed in a separate plane crash.